In 2018, India walked away from a stealth fighter it had spent 11 years and billions of dollars helping to build. It was Russia's answer to the American F-22, a fifth-generation jet meant to rule the skies for 40 years. India had paid to be at the table, and after more than a decade studying the aircraft from the inside, the country that knew it best decided it wasn't worth buying. India was not the last to say no. It was the warning. This is the Sukhoi Su-57. NATO calls it the Felon. It is, by most accounts, one of the most agile fighters ever flown, a genuinely dangerous airplane. It is also one of the great commercial failures in modern aviation. 15 years after its first flight, almost no one in the world has agreed to buy it. This is the story of how Russia built a world-class fighter and could not sell it. It began as the PAK FA, the Prospective Frontline Aviation Complex, and first flew as the T-50 prototype on the 29th of January 2010 from a Sukhoi plant in the Russian Far East. The goal was a true fifth-generation fighter, defined by four things the F-22 had introduced a decade earlier: stealth to delay detection, supercruise to fly fast without afterburner, sensor fusion to see first, and the agility to win if the fight ever got close. On paper, the Su-57 promised all four. In the air, it delivered some of them better than anything Russia had ever built. Because make no mistake, the airframe is brilliant. Three-dimensional thrust vectoring nozzles let the Su-57 point its nose almost anywhere, bleeding speed and turning inside aircraft that should outfly it. At air shows, it does things that look impossible: falling leaves, flat spins, post-saw pirouettes that end with the nose snapping onto a target. Underneath, it carries weapons inside the fuselage to stay clean, and it was designed around one of the longest-reaching air-to-air missiles in the world, able to threaten tankers and radar planes from distances that rewrite how an air battle opens. Its radar doesn't just look forward. Smaller arrays set into the wings and sides are meant to give it awareness in every direction. The pilots who fly it describe an aircraft that does exactly what they ask. If a fighter were judged only by how it moves and how hard it hits, the Felon would be a triumph. But a fighter is not judged only by how it moves. It is judged by whether anyone will buy it, and there the story turns. Start with the engines. A fifth-generation fighter is supposed to fly on a fifth-generation engine, one that can push it past the speed of sound and hold it there without afterburner, the trick called supercruise, while running cool enough and clean enough not to give the stealth away. The Su-57 does not have that engine, at least not yet. For most of its life, it has flown on the AL-41F1, internally called ISDEL-117, an engine derived from the one in the older, non-stealthy Su-35. It is a good engine. It is not a fifth-generation one. The definitive new power plant, ISDEL-30 from the Saturn Design Bureau, first flew on a Su-57 testbed in late 2017 and then slipped, year after year, toward a service date that kept moving and moving. So the world's newest stealth fighter spent its entire first decade with, in effect, a fourth-generation plus heart. Imagine buying a supercar and being told the real engine ships later. For a customer spending billions, later is not a word you want in the brochure. Then there is the stealth, the single most important word in fifth generation and the Su-57's most contested claim. Western analysts have pointed for years at the details: an infrared sensor mounted in plain sight ahead of the cockpit, panel gaps and exposed actuators where an F-22 or F-35 hides everything, engine inlets that, by most independent assessments, are shaped to be fast and serviceable rather than truly invisible to radar. The likeliest truth is that the Su-57 was built to be hard to find from the front and devastating up close, a different bet than the all-aspect stealth of its American rivals. For a buyer comparing brochures, hard to find from the front is a difficult thing to pay top dollar for. Which brings us back to India, because India's story is the one that should have sold the aircraft and instead buried it. In 2007, India and Russia signed a framework to co-develop a version of the jet, the fifth-generation fighter aircraft program, the FGFA. It was meant to be one of the largest defense deals in India's history, more than 100 aircraft, a program whose cost climbed toward $35 billion, and Indian engineers working shoulder to shoulder with Sukhoi on the design itself. This was Russia's dream customer, a country with the money, the need, and a half-century habit of buying Russian. And for more than a decade, India did something almost no other potential buyer on Earth could do. It looked at the Su-57 from the inside. It saw the test data. It sat in the design reviews. It watched the engine slip and the promises soften. The relationship soured into years of arguments over who built what, over how much technology Russia would actually hand over a price that kept rising for an aircraft that kept under-delivering. And in April 2018, India walked away. The reasons that leaked out read like a damning review from the only people who'd seen the books. The stealth, they said, was only credible from the front, barely better than a good fourth-generation jet. The engines were not ready, and the new one kept slipping. Russia would not hand over the source code and the design data India wanted most. And the price kept climbing toward $150, even $200 million per aircraft. After 11 years, the partner who knew the aircraft best concluded it wasn't worth the money. No marketing brochure could undo a verdict like that, and every other buyer in the world heard it.
Even at home, the program crawled, years of single-digit deliveries. And then, on the 24th of December 2019, the very first series production Su-57, the first one built for the Russian Air Force, not a prototype, crashed during a test flight before it could ever be delivered. The pilot ejected. The aircraft was lost. It was a small disaster with an outsized message. The assembly line that was supposed to reassure the world had just destroyed its first product on the way out the door. And surrounding all of it, the politics. Since 2017, an American law called CAATSA has threatened secondary sanctions against any country that buys major Russian weapons. For a nation choosing a stealth fighter, that turns a Russian jet into a liability that can poison its relationship with Washington and the entire Western supply chain. By 2022, the problem got worse. Sanctions choked the imported electronics that a modern fighter depends on. The Su-57 didn't just have to win on merit, it had to be worth a fight with the United States. For almost everyone, it wasn't. So look at the scoreboard. The F-35, the aircraft the Su-57 was built to challenge, has been ordered by around 20 nations and built more than 1,000 times over. The Su-57, 15 years in, has exactly one confirmed export customer, Algeria, which began taking delivery in 2025, the first fifth-generation fighter other than the F-35 ever sold to a foreign air force. It's a genuine milestone for Russia. It is also the entire list, a dozen-odd jets to a single buyer after 15 years of trying. Over the years, a familiar set of names was floated as interested. Turkey, after it was thrown out of the F-35 program, a handful of traditional Russian customers weighing their options. But interest is not a contract, and one after another they weighed the same things India had: the unfinished engine, the contested stealth, and the sanctions that come attached, and kept their wallets closed. Russia built a fighter to win the global market. 15 years later, the global market has bought about a dozen. Russia understood the problem, and its answer told you everything. In 2021, at the Max Air Show, it pulled the cover off a brand new jet, the Su-75 Checkmate, a single-engine, lower-cost stealth fighter built for one purpose: to win the export customers the Su-57 could not. The marketing was aimed straight at the developing world, a stealth fighter at a fraction of the F-35's price. But think about what that launch actually admitted. The flagship, the Su-57 itself, was too expensive, too compromised, and too politically toxic to sell.
So Russia quietly designed a cheaper aircraft to chase the very same buyers. And then the war came, and the budgets tightened, and the Checkmate followed the Felon's path exactly. No confirmed customers, a first flight that slipped year after year, a mock-up doing the rounds at air shows while the real thing stayed on the ground. The answer to a sales failure was another aircraft that hasn't sold. And the war that should have been its proving ground only sharpened the picture. In Ukraine, the Su-57 has mostly been kept far from the front, used to fire standoff missiles from deep inside Russian airspace, away from the air defenses a true stealth fighter is supposed to walk through. Then, in June 2024, Ukraine did something that would have been unthinkable for an F-22. Long-range drones reached a Su-57 parked at a test airfield nearly 600 kilometers from the front and damaged it on the ground. Satellite photos showed the scorch marks. Whatever the aircraft can do in the air, it spent the biggest war of its lifetime being protected, not unleashed. Which makes the latest chapter the most telling of all. In late 2025, at the Dubai Air Show, on the eve of a Putin visit to New Delhi, Russia went back to India, the customer that already said no, and offered the Su-57 one more time. Not just the jets, off-the-shelf deliveries, a local production line, and the one thing Moscow had always refused, full technology transfer, down to the source code, the engines, the radar. The word from the Russian arms exporter, reportedly, was that all of India's demands were now acceptable. It is the behavior of a seller who has run out of other doors to knock on. The pitch that opened 15 years ago with rival to the F-22 has become, please, on your terms this time. So here is the paradox of the Felon. By the measure of pure flying, Russia built one of the finest fighters in the world. By every other measure that decides whether a fighter actually matters, a mature engine, credible stealth, a price a buyer will pay, a politics a buyer can survive, a factory that delivers on time, it fell short again and again. The result is an aircraft that is genuinely formidable, and 15 years on, almost entirely unwanted. One modest export order, a few dozen flying at home, and a partner it is still chasing across the world, hat in hand. The Su-57 can do things few jets on Earth can do. It just couldn't do the one thing every weapon is ultimately built to do: convince enough people to bet their nation on it.